Kimberly Chafee from Kimberly's Quilting and Sewing. This week we're going to make this great table topper from Doug Leko's book, Grand Portage. Working with Holly Taylor's line, Lady Slipper Lodge, we're going to review the book and learn my easy way to attach borders without pinning. So today we're going to work on this great small quilt table topper called Rush Hour. And what I really love looking through Doug's book is his detail instructions. If you can zoom in here, okay. What we have is this great chart. I love this. Oftentimes when designers design their patterns, it's kind of hard to find what the cuts are going to be and the subcuts. Doug makes this really simple. He not only blocks it in here, the information for the fabric is here, what the first cut's going to be and what the subcut's going to be and how to label it. Kudos to Doug for making that super simple, because it is so frustrating to be trying to read directions and understand what the designer has you cut and you end up making wrong cuts. And we just think that this is definitely the way to go. So we're going to go ahead and subcut our charm squares, and we're going to show you that step and we'll proceed. So what Doug has us doing first is taking our charm square pack from Lady Slipper Lodge, and we're going to be cutting that and separating it. So he tells us in our first step that we're to choose 23 5-inch squares, which I did and set off to the side, and then 4 squares and I set them off to the side, and then we're going to take 14 squares and cut them into 2.5-inch squares. So because it's a charm square, the easiest way to do this is, again, we're going to measure off of our ruler, and we're going to cut this. Since it's 5 inches, we're going to make a cut this way. And notice how I'm not even going to lift my fabric. I'm just going to turn my ruler, and again, we have this great track here on the ruler, and I have 2.5-inch squares instantaneously. So we're going to cut that all up, and we're going to subcut our other charm squares, and then we're going to start putting this table topper together. Fantastic. I wanted to mention while we're cutting these charm square packs that I never pre-wash my charm squares or any of my pre-cuts. I know people that do, and that's perfectly fine. I like the sizing that comes from the manufacturing of them. There's a little bit of stiffness to them, and I believe that helps cut, especially when we're dealing with like small pieces like the 5-inch squares or jelly rolls that are 2.5-inch strips. So I don't pre-wash my charm square packs. If you do, that's fantastic. That's completely up to you. But I just choose not to. So I'm going to go ahead and cut these 2 3/4 by 5-inch, and we'll get the rest of this all pre-cut 2 3/4. Again, I'm measuring off of my ruler and not off of my cutting mat. 1 2 3/4. Fantastic. And we'll start putting this together. So we have here one of the rows that Doug had us complete with 5 of our 5-inch charm squares. And I love this in his directions. It says proof to 23 inches by 5 inches rectangle. So what I did is I ironed it all out after I was done pressing, and he tells us in the instructions which direction to press our seams. And when I did that, I found that I actually was off, not quite a 1/2 inch, like 3/8 of an inch. And what that tells me is I'm actually going to have to use a scant 1/4 inch when sewing. My needle's over a little bit too far, and it's not making a 23-inch rectangle like what he wants. So what I'm happy about is that he told me I should be at 23 inches. Nothing is more frustrating than doing a pattern and finding that when you're done, things are not lining up correctly. If the designer would tell you this is what this should measure when you are done doing this step, all the other steps fall into place so much better. So I'm really happy that he put that in there. I am now ready to proceed. My blocks are exactly 23 inches by 5, just like he wants them. And now the easy part comes. We're going to start putting our rows together. So very exciting. This is moving along beautifully, and I'm going to have a great table topper by the end of today. When I get ready to put on borders or sashing to the piece of fabric, I don't pin. Pinning is time consuming, and I want to pretty much get it done as quick as possible. I'm going to make sure though that my border is the exact same length as the side that it's going on, never longer, and that way it maintains the squareness of the quilt. If this was just going to go down and I was going to have to trim when I was done, and I start sewing and I go from here to here and I do the other side the same without ever measuring these strips to make sure that they are the same length as this, then I'm going to have a table topper that's never going to come out square. So first and foremost, this strip has to be the exact same length as the piece that's going on. At that point, what I do is I'll put my right sides together and I'll sit down at the machine, and I actually start sewing probably about 3 inches in, and I stop, and then I line up the bottom and I hold it and I sew the rest of the way. There's really no other way to get that perfectly straight unless you are pinning, but like I said, pinning to me is time consuming, so I try not to do that. So sew down the first 3 inches, make sure that this matches at the bottom, and then just keep following it down, 1/4 inch seam allowance. And if you get down to where this is short on the bottom, then you probably didn't cut this piece correctly, or if it's hanging past, you stretched it too much while you were pinning or while you were sewing it down. So just begin a sewing here, then pull it a little bit, that will line up, sew the rest of the way down, border is on. Now that we have our side patches on, it is time to attach our inner border. Doug tells us in the book to go ahead and measure the sides of the quilt top and cut the strips. I feel as though we need a little further explanation on this. Back in the day, Eleanor Burns, I think, gave the perfect way to make sure to cut the border strips perfectly so that the top remains square. It's a very simple math equation, so let's go through that. The first thing I'm going to do is measure this side and its opposite side. I'm going to take those two numbers, add them together, and divide by 2. That number is what I'm going to use to cut my strip length. So for example, if this side measures 30 inches, but that side measures 31 inches, when I add them together and divide by 2, each side would come out at 30.5 inches. That's how long to cut this strip. Once I cut that, sew it down and press it, that's how I will cut the strips for the opposite sides of the quilt top. This is going to keep the quilt top square, and I think is the best method for doing this. Now that we have our quilt top done, now we're going to put it together and with our backing and our batting. One of the favorite things I like to do is spray baste a quilt. It's fast, it's easy, the products on the market are really good, and I don't like to pin. Pinning for me takes a lot of time, and I usually end up hitting a pin with the sewing machine. So this is how we have always layered and done our quilts, even when we had the shop and needed to get samples done quickly. We used our Sullivan's quilt basting spray, and I'm going to just give you a real quick demo on how we do this. So we have our quilt top laid out. I'm going to flip back half of it. Spray it down. Flip it back. Smooth it down. Take this side, flip it back. Lay this down. Smooth it down. And we're ready to go. Very fast, very easy. I would suggest opening a window anytime you are spray basting. The fumes aren't so bad, but some people are really sensitive to the fumes. So you're going to want to make sure that you have some ventilation. So that's how we did the top. We're going to cut the batting, flip it over, and put on the back. This quilt top was just fantastic to make. Not only were the instructions very easy to follow, but it came out square. Everything just fell into place. I wanted to take a moment to show you, though, the back of the quilt, because oftentimes when people talk to me about how they spray baste their quilts, they often say, well, my quilt back wrinkled, or how do you do that without it wrinkling? You just have to make sure that you're using enough spray baste when you are spray basting that, and you're smoothing from the center out as you go. If you do that, you really should have a nice flat back. I was really pleased how the back came out. Yes, once in a blue moon, you might get a pucker, but it's very rare, especially if you spray baste correctly and you're smoothing out from the center outwards as you're going. So I wanted to show you for just a second the back of the quilt. I'm very pleased with it, and 2 thumbs up to Doug and his great instructions. Very excited going forward to see more great patterns from Doug. We hope you enjoyed our review of Doug Leko's book, Grand Portage. Join us again next time for another review and our invisible machine applique technique. Please like and subscribe for more videos from Kimberly's Quilting and Sewing.